Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really unconventional text that completely challenges everything we thought we knew about reality, physics, and, well, the very nature of what we're looking at when we stare up at the sky. We're going to explore a framework by an author who argues that mirages are absolutely not what science tells us they are. Seriously, what if a mirage isn't just some trick of the light? What if it's actually a window into a higher dimension? The source text we're examining today asks us to basically throw out conventional meteorology and optical physics for a minute. It poses this mind-bending mystery. What if those floating cities or shimmering mountains we occasionally see on the horizon are actually glimpses of something the author calls the Elysium world? This brings us to our first section, challenging the scientific consensus. To really grasp this radical perspective, we first need to look at exactly how the author completely dismantles mainstream science. So, the accepted scientific consensus, the stuff most of us learned back in middle school, is that a mirage is just an atmospheric optical phenomenon. It supposedly happens when light refracts or reflects through air layers of different densities. Usually this is driven by extreme temperature changes, right? Like scorching hot sand in the desert or freezing cooled ocean currents. The light bends, kind of like a chopstick sitting in a glass of water, and projects distant earthly landscapes up into the sky. It's neat, it's tidy, and hey, it's backed by physics. But our author? Yeah, they aren't buying it for a second. Instead, the author launches into this rapid-fire series of questions to tear down that scientific model, starting with a pretty glaring visual contradiction. Think about it. If refraction typically inverts images, why are the mirages we see in the sky almost always standing completely upright? The author points out that if light is supposedly bouncing from the ground up to the sky, how does the reflection appear to come from above to below? Unless there's some theoretical infinite series of refractions going on, which, let's be real, we just don't see in everyday life. And the critique just keeps building. The author asks, if the density rules of hot sand and cool air are universal laws of physics, then why don't mirages happen in all deserts? If it's truly just basic thermal expansion and light bending, we should literally be seeing mirages constantly over every single desert on Earth. Yet, as the text notes, some deserts can go decades without a single mirage appearing. Doesn't really add up, does it? And this brilliantly illustrates the author's next major point. The text brings up a highly specific geographical anomaly, the Penglai Peninsula in Shandong. Now, scientists usually claim that mirages over water happen in the summer, when cold water cools the surface air while the air above it stays hot. But the author points out that on December 16, 2002, literally in the dead of winter, a spectacular mirage appeared right over Penglai. That completely defies the summer heat theory. The author even shoots down the idea that modern environmental cleanups caused this. They note that, hey, before the Industrial Revolution, the air was pristine everywhere, but mirages were still incredibly rare. Moving into our next section, glimpses of Elysium. So if the scientific explanation is supposedly full of holes, what's the alternative? Well, that leads us right into the author's highly unconventional framework. When you compare the standard scientific view of light refraction with the author's massive paradigm shift, it's pretty wild. What if a mirage is actually a drop of scenery from a 36-dimensional space called the Elysium world? According to the text, a mirage is absolutely not a reflection of earthly scenery. Instead, it's a distortion of time and space, revealing a higher plane of existence that is actually surrounding us all the time. In fact, the author goes as far as to state that our Earth, our entire solar system, and the Milky Way itself are all literally situated inside this Elysium world. So the crucial point here is this startling number 3%. The author claims that humanity can perceive less than 3% of the universe. Just like we can't see ultraviolet light or infrared rays with our naked eyes, we can't see the Elysium world. Why? Because we lack the spiritual merits and virtues to do so. The author compares it to asking why an ordinary person can't just stroll in and live in the White House. You need the proper credentials, and right now, humanity simply doesn't have the biological or spiritual structure to see the other 97% of reality. This leads to our next section, understanding latitudinal time. To explain exactly how these hidden dimensions interact with our own, the text introduces this fascinating spatial and temporal mechanic. The author uses this brilliant mathematical visualization to help us map the whole thing out. Imagine reality as a graph. On the x-axis, you've got longitudinal time. That's our normal material human world, where time moves forward steadily. Tick, tick, tick. But operating on the z-axis, we have latitudinal time. This represents the non-material Elysium world. The text argues that when a mirage happens, that z-axis is temporarily intersecting with our x-axis. So a mirage is actually an emergence of latitudinal spacetime, and people or objects can literally slip out of our longitudinal timeline and right into this latitudinal dimension. Now for a really interesting section: Legends of Lost Time. So what actually happens when you slip into that z-axis? Well, the text grounds this incredibly abstract theory with some genuinely eerie historical accounts and folklore. The author points to 3 distinct pieces of evidence to try and prove the real-world existence of latitudinal time. We've got an entire military force vanishing in 1915, a commercial flight mysteriously disappearing in 1994, and an ancient folklore tale about a woodcutter. In every single one of these cases, the subject interacted with what the author claims was a localized emergence of the Elysium world. Let's take a closer look at what went down. First up is the chilling 1915 Gallipoli incident. According to the text, a Turkish army was advancing on position 60 when these silent clouds, complete with strange metallic beams, descended vertically right onto the hill. Eyewitnesses reportedly watched as soldiers marched straight into this fog, looking completely crazed and totally deaf to the shouts of their comrades trying to stop them. When the clouds eventually lifted and floated away, the entire army was just gone, without a single trace. According to the author, they didn't just get lost. They literally marched into a mirage, slipping permanently into the z-axis. Then there is this wildly fascinating case from 1994. An Italian passenger plane vanished from radar screens over the African coast. Everyone panicked, but a little while later, it just popped right back onto the screen and landed safely. The crazy part? The crew was totally puzzled why everyone freaking out on the ground. To them, it was a perfectly normal flight. They had absolutely no idea anything unusual had occurred. But investigators soon discovered that every single watch on board, belonging to the crew and all 315 passengers, was exactly 20 minutes slow. The text argues that the plane briefly slipped into latitudinal time. To everyone on board, it was just the blink of an eye, but in our longitudinal x-axis time, a full 20 minutes had ticked by. Finally, we have the classic folklore of the woodcutter. The story goes that a woodcutter wanders into the mountains and sees 2 old men playing chess. He squats down to watch, and he starts noticing something really bizarre. The leaves on the trees are rapidly shifting from yellow to green and back again. Suddenly, the old men vanish. The mirage ends. He hikes back down the mountain, which only takes him a few hours, but discovers that centuries have passed in his village. He is now considered a long-lost ancient ancestor. The author explains that this woodcutter encountered a ground-level mirage. Now, he didn't fully disappear into the Elysium world because his spiritual quality apparently wasn't high enough to stay, but just that brief, fleeting exposure to latitudinal time, it cost him centuries of earthly longitudinal time. And that brings us to our final section, A Path to Awakening. This explores the core purpose of the author's text. Why do these dimensional anomalies happen at all? I mean, if the universe is really built this way, what's the ultimate point of a mirage? According to the source, mirages are definitely not random accidents of weather or light. Not at all. Instead, they are a deliberate arrangement. In this framework, they're intentional signs placed by a higher power, what the text refers to as the greatest creator, to indicate that humanity's true home is somewhere far beyond this material world. They are specifically designed to spark a spiritual awakening in those who are fated to see them, serving as a powerful reminder that our physical universe is basically an illusion compared to the true permanent reality of the Elysium world. Now, what's really interesting here is how the author connects this grand cosmic theory back to human history's greatest spiritual figures. Consider this argument. God, Jesus, and Buddha Shakyamuni are not fooling us. They gave up everything in the world, so why would they need to deceive us? The author's final point is essentially a logical deduction based on motive. Think about it. Swindlers usually seek money, power, or some sort of personal gain. But figures like Jesus and Buddha give up absolutely all worldly possessions to point humanity toward these higher dimensions. The text argues that they had literally no earthly reason to lie, so therefore, the multidimensional, non-material world they kept pointing toward, it just has to be real. We've definitely covered a lot of ground today, right? Moving from the rigid physics of optical refraction all the way to 36-dimensional spaces, latitudinal time axes, and vanished armies. Whether you view this text as a fascinating piece of modern mythology, a deep spiritual metaphor, or literally a complete rethinking of atmospheric phenomena, it absolutely forces us to question the limits of our own perception. So I'm going to leave you with this thought to ponder. What might you really be seeing the next time you look out at a shimmering image on the horizon?